The Committee on House Administration will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair may declare recess at any time. Also, without objection, the meeting record will remain open for 5 legislative days, so members may submit any materials they wish to be included therein. Thank you, Ranking Member Morelli, members of the committee, and our witnesses for joining us in our field hearing here in Atlanta, Georgia. Today we have Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene, Mike Collins, and Lucy McBath joining us, and they've been waived onto the committee to participate in today's hearing. I'm excited to be in Atlanta, Georgia, a state that's implemented common sense voter integrity reforms. 2 years ago, Georgia enacted Bill 202. The left was ruthless in attacking this legislation. The left seems to always attack common sense voter integrity provisions. Joe Biden falsely claimed the bill was, quote, Jim Crow 2.0. He fear-mongered that the bill was going to lead to voter suppression. But once again, Joe Biden was flat out wrong. Yet the Democrats' lies seeped into woke corporate boardrooms. Some of our nation's largest companies joined in the false attacks and boycotted Georgia in protest over the bill. 2 years ago, Major League Baseball moved the All-Star Game out of Atlanta on the Democrats' false narrative. This hurt workers who are relying on the game for their income. Fast forward. Not only did the Atlanta Braves go on to win the World Series, but under the new, as a Brewers fan, that kind of hurts my heart. But it is true. It is true. The Atlanta Braves would go on to win the World Series. But under the Georgia election law, Georgia hit a new record with the highest voter turnout in midterm history. I'll now play a 2-minute video. Hear for yourself the left's false claims on election integrity being debunked.
SB 202 reforms to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat.
It proved immediately polarizing.
Well, first of all, I do absolutely agree that it's racist. It is a redux of Jim Crow in a suit and tie.
21st century Jim Crow assault is real.
Organizations like the PGA, the MLB are also under pressure to move high-profile events like the Masters and the All-Star Game out of your state of Georgia. Should boycotts be on the table?
I think we all have to use our voices.
So, Mr. President, what do you think about the possibility that baseball decides to move their All-Star Game out of Atlanta because of this political issue?
I think today's professional athletes are acting incredibly responsibly. I would strongly support them doing that.
Major League Baseball announcing it's moving this season's All-Star Game and MLB draft out of Atlanta, Georgia. The reason is the state's new law on voting.
Major League Baseball for pulling the All-Star Game out of Atlanta, a move one local official says could cost upwards of $100 million in lost revenue.
It obviously had an economic impact. Thousands of average Georgians who were relying on that as an economic opportunity lost out.
Turnout in Georgia now breaking records. More than 250,000 people have voted in person just since Monday.
Over 500,000 votes now cast in the Peach State. It's historic record voter turnout.
And the big argument from the White House was that it would suppress voting. But there was record turnout in the primary, there was record turnout in the general.
And then the empirical data came forward and actually showed that by putting in place strong voter integrity provisions, what we actually got was higher participation. So tomorrow is the 2023 Major League Baseball All-Star Game. We're here at Turner Field, former home of the Atlanta Braves and now Georgia State University's Center Park Stadium. I'm proud to share that today we're officially introducing the American Confidence in Elections Act. The ACE Act is our federalist approach to boost voter confidence and encourage more states to implement common sense election integrity reforms. We've held several hearings leading up to today's introduction, focusing on the 3 main pillars of the bill. The ACE Act will provide states with the tools to implement election integrity reforms, implement key election integrity reforms in Washington, D.C. in particular, and protect political speech. I know the left is going to be attacking the bill just like they did in Georgia. But here's the truth about the ACE Act. The ACE Act will uphold the Constitution and ensure states maintain primary control over elections. The ACE Act will support our overseas military voters. The ACE Act will give states access to federal databases like the Social Security death list so they can remove dead people from their active voter rolls. The ACE Act will prevent federal funds from flowing to places that allow non-citizens to vote. The ACE Act will stop foreign adversaries from voting in D.C. elections. The ACE Act will permanently prohibit bureaucrats of the IRS from targeting conservative nonprofit groups. The ACE Act will fight against cancel culture and protect Americans' First Amendment rights. The ACE Act will stop the Biden administration from weaponizing federal agencies, and it will prevent federal dollars from being used for partisan election activities. Most importantly, the ACE Act will restore voter confidence in our elections. When voters are more confident their vote will count, they're more likely to participate. Fighting for election integrity is important, and we're prepared to win. The ACE Act is House Republicans' key election integrity bill, and I look forward to seeing it pass on the House floor later this year. Thank you. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Morelli, for 5 minutes for the purposes of making opening remarks.
Good afternoon, and thank you, first of all, to the people of Georgia for hosting us, and to Chairman Stile for welcoming us today. We meet for what is the 9th elections-related hearing this committee has held in just this Congress in a little over 6 months. Once again, we'll discuss conspiracy theories about hypothetical election insecurity, and the majority will push their now familiar anti-voter agenda. The only difference now is that we've taken the circus on the road. One might ask, why are we here in Georgia? The answer is simple. We're here because in 2020, Joe Biden won and Donald Trump lost. There was no widespread voter fraud in Georgia. There were no suitcases full of fake ballots. No voting machines changed any votes. In fact, we only know of one possible crime that took place because it was recorded on tape. Please play the video.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Donald Trump didn't win Georgia, of course. The results confirm that. A Trump-requested recount confirmed that. A statewide audit confirmed that. Multiple investigations have confirmed that. But instead of condemning this blatant attempt to steal an election, the Georgia legislature responded to the former president's lies by proposing and passing SB 202 in early 2021. SB 202 affected almost every method of voting in Georgia. For example, SB 202 dramatically limited the number of drop boxes voters can use, especially in significantly black communities, to return their ballots. The law banned individuals and groups from giving out water or food to voters waiting in line, sometimes for hours in the hot Georgia sun, to vote. Mr. Chairman. SB 202 also allows any voter to challenge the eligibility of any other voter, with no limit on the number of challenges allowed. One man alone in Forsyth County had challenged the eligibility of over 13,000 valid voters. Dr. Kathleen Ruth, a GOP-appointed member of Fulton County's Elections Board and a witness here today, herself received a voter challenge because of SB 202. These indiscriminate challenges do not just threaten Georgians' access to the ballot, they overwhelm election administrators who must respond to tens of thousands of unwarranted challenges within a handful of days. It's important that our voter rolls are accurate and up to date, but it should be the role of elections administrators to ensure proper election administration, not some local election denying conspiracy theorist who's been fooled by the former president and his enablers. Letting vigilantes subject their neighbors based on no evidence to state-enforced inquisitions in the name of election integrity is a nightmare out of an Orwellian novel. Unfortunately, this doublespeak is in line with modern Republican orthodoxy. SB 202's provisions simultaneously limit voter access while overburdening election administration. An overburdened election administration, in turn, further jeopardizes voter access. The big lie origins of SB 202 mirror the big lie origins of the majority's ACE Act, and the damaging effects of SB 202 on Georgia voters will be imposed upon all Americans if the ACE Act is enacted nationally. I have to give my majority colleagues credit, if nothing else, for their boldness. Most thieves come in the middle of the night, but here we are in broad daylight. We're at the scene of the crime. We are holding a hearing in Georgia where President Trump, in his now infamous and corrupt call to Secretary Raffensperger, tried to irrevocably damage the integrity of American elections. If our majority truly cared about restoring confidence in our elections, perhaps we would finally confront their twice-indicted leader for his own behavior. But I won't hold my breath. We should do better. We must do better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Without objection, all members' opening statements will be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Pursuant to paragraph B of Committee Rule 6, the witnesses will please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative and may be seated. I'll now introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Dr. Kathleen Ruth, who was the Vice Chair of the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections from 2019 to 2023 and currently serves as the Director of Program Development at CAI Global. Dr. Ruth, it's always great to have a fellow Wisconsin Badger with us, even when in Atlanta, Georgia. Our next witness, Mr. Hans von Spakovsky, is a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation Center for Legal and Judicial Studies and has also served on the Fulton County Registration and Elections Board. As a manager of the think tank's Election Law Reform Initiative, Mr. von Spakovsky is a leader on studying voter fraud and voter ID, enforcement of federal voting rights laws, administration of elections, and voting equipment standards. Our next witness, Vernetta Keith Nuruddin, was appointed to serve on the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections as Vice Chair, overseeing all elections in Fulton County from 2017 to 2021. Ms. Nuruddin is certified by the Election Secretary of State as a Georgia elections official, a Georgia registrar, and a municipal elections official. And finally, Kathy Woolard has served as the Chair of Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections since September 2021. As a reminder, we've read your written statements and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Under Committee Rule 9, you're to limit your oral presentation to a brief summary of your written statement unless I extend the time period in consultation with Ranking Member Morelli. Please remember to press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green, and after 4 minutes, it will turn yellow. When the red light comes up, your 5 minutes have expired, and I would ask you to please wrap up. I'll now recognize Dr. Kathleen Ruth for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank the Committee on House Administration for this invitation. I value public service and was honored to serve 2 terms as a member of the Fulton County Board of Registrations and Elections from 2019 to 2023. Fulton County is the largest county in the state of Georgia. It has a population roughly the size of 8 states. It covers 70 miles from end to end across 15 cities, including the city of Atlanta. Fulton has approximately 765,000 voters. I say all this to highlight the complexities encountered in managing efficient elections. The 2020 election presented unique and elevated challenges to the county's well-documented history of issues administering elections. The election was managed through a global pandemic. Lawmakers responded by introducing new processes designed to make voting accessible during the public health crisis, including expanding absentee by mail, introducing drop boxes, and extending in-person voting. All of this was on top of the implementation of new voting machines. Additionally, Fulton County was at the center of growing change in the political climate, beginning in 2016, elevating in 2018, and peaking in 2020. Each of these factors exacerbated the unique complexities of managing elections in Fulton County, while also highlighting the vulnerabilities and underlying problems that have existed in elections for years across the country. Fast forwarding to 2023, the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections worked with internal partners to examine lessons learned and develop recommendations from 2020 to make improvements. The department also received reports based on hundreds of hours of observation documented from Carter Jones, an election strategist, and the Carter Center to make further adjustments to increase election administration performance. Lastly, House Bill 202 helped to improve the processing of absentee applications and absentee by mail ballots to ensure more timely verification. The Fulton County BRE, under new leadership, increased staff, guidance from an engaged Board of Registration and Elections, were able to incorporate recommendations and make significant improvements to modernize elections, develop standard operating procedures for every function of elections, provide more contextualized poll worker training, and maintain compliance with the State Board of Election. For Fulton to uphold the mission to ensure that the registration and elections process is efficient and effectively provided to all eligible citizens, state officials will need to continuously provide tools to modernize elections and remove outdated and burdensome policies. American voters expect voting officials to ensure that every eligible citizen can vote and make sure that their vote is not weakened due to errors, inconsistencies, and inefficient systems. I'm honored to participate in today's hearing and hope that my experience and observations can be used to support the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ruth. Mr. Hans Paskowski, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the invitation to be here today. As I was coming down here, I was reminded of the fact that many members of the committee probably know I've testified in front of congressional hearings numerous times, but the first time I ever did that was more than 2 decades ago at a field hearing in Atlanta after the 2000 election, when Congress was trying to determine what kind of reforms should be put in to try to prevent the kind of problems we saw in Florida from happening again. And that led to the passage of the Help America Vote Act, a bipartisan effort. I really regret the fact that there is this bipartisan divide has developed since then, because that didn't exist in 2002 when Congress did things in the Help America Vote Act, like pass the first, although limited, voter ID requirement for federal elections. We need both access and security in our election process. And contrary to what many critics say, one does not cancel out the other. The kind of common sense reforms, as Georgia passed, are prime examples of providing both access and security. Congress has to keep in mind that states have had the primary role in administering our elections. That's what the Constitution says since our founding, under the ultimate supervision of Congress and under the protections of the Constitution and federal laws passed pursuant to it, like the Voting Rights Act. The role of federal government should be to assist and help the states in their administration of elections, not imposing unjustified, unconstitutional, and impractical mandates on them, which is what H.R. 1, the For the People Act, would have done, including things like banning all voter ID laws in the country, a requirement that's overwhelmingly supported by Americans, no matter their race or political background. This bill does good things like mandate access for the states to federal databases, such as the Department of Homeland Security's Alien Database. You have to be a citizen to vote in federal elections. You have to be a citizen to vote in all state elections in all states. The exception is some states allow that in local elections. But clearly, that's relevant to your eligibility, and yet the Department of Homeland Security for years, through bureaucracy and red tape, has made it so difficult for states to get that information that most state election officials will tell you they've given up trying to do it. Another clear source of information, and I don't know why anyone would be against this, is federal courts call people for jury duty, and I'm sure most of the people in this room have been called for jury duty. They get their jury lists from state election officials. When someone is excused from jury duty in a federal court, and remember, they have to answer questions under oath, because they say, I am not a U.S. citizen, that information needs to be sent back to state election officials, yet today it is not. And the amendment in this bill to the NVRA that would require that is a good thing. So is the amendment that's proposed in this bill to the Real ID Act. Again, the major form of ID used in this country, because we don't have a national ID card, are state driver's licenses. Obviously, those driver's licenses should state on their face whether you are a U.S. citizen or not. And that would be useful not only in the voting context, but also in many others, such as applications for federal welfare benefits, which in most cases require you to be a U.S. citizen. One of the most, look, many parts of this bill deal with election administrations and providing assistance to the states. But I got to tell you, one of the most important provisions in here is Title VI, which would terminate all federal dollars for and end the disinformation board set up by DHS, which is this administration's version of an Orwellian ministry of truth. I cannot believe that the federal government has been engaging in censoring Americans' viewpoints and opinions. That was something my parents thought we had left behind when my German mother, who grew up in Nazi Germany, immigrated to this country with my Russian father. And yet we've had it going on here. The federal government has no business determining what is the truth or engaging in any actions that censor information, opinions, and viewpoints of American citizens. I can talk a lot about how turnout in Georgia not only was above the national average turnout in 2022, but was higher than the turnout of the three home states of the biggest critics. The turnout in Georgia was higher than Delaware, New York, and California, and yet the state has been criticized. Let me end with this. I want to ensure that every eligible American is able to vote, that their votes are not diluted because of fraud, errors, mistakes made by election officials. I think the ACE Act will do that by helping the states and not telling them what to do in often what could be a bad way. And those changes to protect First Amendment rights are vitally important, because being able to speak politically in the election area is vital to maintaining our democracy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Von